Hi everyone, my name is Jules Boudou and I'm here to talk about my thesis research. I'm a Master's of Social Work student at the University of Northern British Columbia in Prince George, BC. I've also been working on the front line of harm reduction for the past 6 years, both in harm reduction housing and overdose prevention sites. So what do we mean by stimulant agonist therapy? Well, sometimes it's also called prescribed stimulant safe supply. These are medications that can replace the use of illicit stimulants such as speed, meth, crack, or cocaine. For just over 2 years here in British Columbia, we've had clinical guidelines so that prescribers can provide replacement medications for those dependent on the illicit drug supply. These guidelines include methylphenidate and dextroamphetamine for those reliant on stimulants, but in my study I also talked to people who had used Adderall or Vyvanse for the same reason. My interest in the subject was piqued when I was supporting someone who used Ritalin to get off a very dangerous cocaine binge. But his psychiatrist didn't want him to be on Ritalin as safe supply because, as she said, the research shows that it doesn't really work. Well, what does the research say? There are two meta-reviews published on the subject in 2016. The first one by Bat et al. Looked at medications prescribed for methamphetamine and amphetamine use, and looking at measures of end-of-study abstinence and treatment of retention, found that these medications had no effect. A second looked at any medication prescribed for cocaine use. Was sustained abstinence in the studies that looked at bupropion, dexamphetamine, and methadone users. However, there was a high risk of bias because of the high rate of dropout across all of the studies, about 50%. So efficacy could not be proven. So after I started this project, this review by Tardelli came out. It combines studies on cocaine, methamphetamine, and amphetamines, but only focused on psychostimulant drugs with a high agonist potential. The conclusion of this review was that amphetamines prescribed in robust doses seem to result in sustained abstinence. Finally, it would be remiss of me to not include the one other qualitative research project on the subject, which aimed to increase opioid treatment retention amongst those with concurrent stimulant use disorders. This study concluded that participants who used stimulants for energy or to treat ADHD were favorable to using high doses of dexamphetamine as a replacement for illicit stimulants. For my research, rather than having a predetermined measure of how these medications worked, I wanted to ask participants, how do they think it worked? That is, what changes in their life were indicative of the medication working? For the study, I recruited 10 participants across the province using networks of overdose prevention sites and addiction medicine services. Two of my participants were aiming to replace cocaine, whereas 8 of them were aiming to replace methamphetamines. In terms of replacement medications, 6 of them used methylphenidate, aka Ritalin, 2 of them used dexamphetamine, and 2 of them used Adderall. Because of the time limitations of this presentation, I'll just focus on 3 findings of my research. So why did the participants want to quit illicit stimulants? Here are a few of the negative effects they were having. They were isolating in their homes, losing weight, becoming irritable, having irrational thinking. They were missing appointments, health and otherwise, skipping or quitting work, suicidal ideation, hearing voices, spending a lot of money on those drugs, not sleeping at all for several days, and dangerous changes in the drug supply. One participant said, "Later down the road, it made me irritable. I make an ass of myself, not think things through rationally." Another said, "The crash would happen, and I would just stay in my room for days, not return texts, not eat, not talk to anybody, purposely avoid appointments, say things to make my friends worry about me." Some of the benefits of the prescribed stimulants that the participants described. So they were a longer acting substance, so they could take drugs less often. They were feeling more emotionally stable. There was less binging on substances, less financial strain, being able to avoid carrying around illegal drugs. They were sleeping more regularly. They were less crashes, physical and emotional, and they were better able to travel and work. One person said, "It did wonders. There was no up and down, none of that roller coaster ride. Everything was working really, really good." Another said, "This will be the first time I get to go home for Christmas in years, because I can't get meth there. Now I can just bring my safe supply." Chipping. This was the most surprising and salient part of my research. Chipping refers to the occasional and recreational use of substances. 8 out of 10 participants referred to using illicit stimulants while on a stable dose of stimulant agonist therapy, and reporting that the presence of the stat changed their relationship with the criminalized stimulant. One person said, "I very seldom touch side, maybe if it's offered to me, but I have no desire to buy it. Methylphenidate is all I need. I'm happy with that." Another said, If I did do street drugs while I was on the safe supply, it was a very little amount and it wouldn't throw me off course or anything. I wouldn't stay up for days or anything. Another said, there were times when I did Adderall instead of buying cocaine, but if someone offered, I would still do it. It's not like Adderall got rid of the addiction or my propensity for wanting to do cocaine because I liked the ritual of it. You know what I mean? There was still like the connection and attachment to that. I definitely didn't have to do as much though. I would still not be spending money on it, and I didn't have those crashes. So yeah, I'd say it worked. So why is this point so important? Well, think back to those clinical trials and meta reviews and what they were looking at and measuring. End of treatment abstinence, sustained abstinence, and percentages of negative urine drug screenings. So if any of those 8 participants had participated in one of those clinical trials, they would have been recorded in the not working group, despite the fact that they had experienced many physical and social benefits, and they genuinely felt that for themselves it had worked. So my question for us as drug researchers, how can clinical trials better reflect drug users' conceptualizations of recovery, and how much nuance has been lost to study design? Thanks, that's my time.